working to connect a region of over 600 cultural bridges between our lands.
Good evening, I'm Alma Angeles, and you're watching ASEAN in Focus on tonight's headlines. The Department of Education and National Task Force to end local communist armed conflict warned public school teachers and the youth to remain vigilant in joining groups that are considered legal fronts of communist groups. And take a look at these photos telling the story of these moments in history. Former President Donald Trump in court speaking the words "not guilty" himself. Before turning it over to the lawyer on his right, Mr. Trump denies all 34 counts against him, felony charges related to hush money payments, including over an alleged tryst with adult film actress Stormy Daniels. And a press conference was held in New York today to mark the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action.
And what we will do and our commitment.
And the Department of National Defense Chief Carlito Galvez Jr. maintained that the 4 additional Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement or EDCA sites would greatly boost the country's defensive capabilities. The Department of Education or DepEd and National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed Conflict or NTF-LCAC warned public school teachers and the youth to remain vigilant in joining groups that are considered legal fronts of the communist groups. The agencies made the warning following tirades of the Alliance of Concerned Teachers or ACT against DepEd amid terrorist attacks in Masbate, Camarines Sur, and Rizal. Take a look.
Organization. And as we always say, hindi naman natin trabaho sa department or hindi natin layunin dito sa DepEd na ma-abridge yung ganyang freedom. Kahit na papayagan natin ang mga teachers natin because hindi naman natin sila mapipigil sa pagsali sa mga grupo na to, the department will also not condone teachers who commit or who engage in criminal activities.
Mr. Torres said that although the majority of ACT members are not part of the underground propaganda, the profile and intent of its core leaders must be tested. The NTF-LCAC described agitators as individuals or leaders who operate with the intent to agitate others, leading them to doing something criminal or socially unacceptable.
Majority of them are not really aware that they are supporting the underground mass organization, which is Kaguma. Yung ACT, yan yung tinatawag natin na legal front organization nila. At yan ay nakatago dun sa underground mass organization, which is Kaguma. Katipunan ng mga gurong makabayan. Yung pong mga core leaders ng ACT, we can confidently say na sila po ay nandoon dun sa Kaguma. Na talagang ang mga miyembro noon ay party members ng CPP, NPA, NDF. So what we should be dealing with are those agitators within the ACT. Kaya nga tayo ay nahihiwagaan kung bakit sinasabi na ang gobyerno, particular ng NTF-LCAC, ay nagre-red tag. When in fact, it was Joma himself in a video taken several decades ago, naming all of this organization.
There are the legal democratic forces in the Philippines. The biggest of these is Bagong Alyansang Makabayan or Bayan in short. It has a membership of more than 2 million members in more than 1,000 member organizations. Its biggest component organizations are Kilusang Mayo Uno, which is the labor center, the Pambansang Kilusang Magbubukid, which is the Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas or KMP, Gabriela, the Women's Alliance, League of Filipino Students, Alliance of Concerned Teachers, Cadena, and so on. As I have earlier pointed out, Partido ng Bayan, solution, there are the legal democratic forces in the Philippines.
Meanwhile, the DepEd and NTF-ELCAC expressed serious concern about the recent attacks of the New People's Army near schools, which should be considered peace zones. Mr. Torres said a pattern was observed in these attacks.
Grabe naman, I think, yung trauma na naramdaman ng ating mga learners, teachers, and non-teaching personnel kung nagpuputukan na sa labas ng paaralan. And I'm sure all of us know this because umikot naman yung mga videos no, na nakita natin taken by the teachers themselves.
Yun nga, to maximize the effects, nilapit nila dun sa mga eskwelahan yung kanilang maengkwentro. And for preservation na rin nila, which is very unfortunate because ginagamit nila na cover ngayon yung mga eskwelahan, particular yung presensya ng mga bata, because they fully know that our security forces would be constrained in conducting operations in these peace zones, in these school zones.
According to DepEd, around 64,237 learners and 300,000 or 3,133 personnel in 165 schools in Masbate, Camarines Sur, and Rizal were affected by the temporary suspension of in-person learning following the reported terrorist attacks. Learners were then shifted to alternative delivery modes. And a recap of former U.S. President Donald Trump turning himself in for a historic New York court hearing held amid tight security and a global media frenzy before traveling back to his residence of Mar-a-Lago in Florida. Take a look. And there you go, these photos telling the story of these moments in history. The former President Donald Trump in court speaking the words "not guilty" himself before turning it over to the lawyer on his right, and that is Todd Blanche, who spoke on behalf of Mr. Trump. Mr. Trump denies all 34 counts against him, felony charges related to hush money payments, including over an alleged tryst with adult film actress Stormy Daniels. Now, the Judge Juan Merchant, said a trial could potentially start as soon as January, a month before the presidential primaries kick off, although Trump's lawyers have indicated they would want it pushed back to next spring. More from our correspondent from the U.S., Joanne Soriano, reporting from New York.
Former U.S. President Donald Trump was arraigned in New York on 34 felony counts in the first ever criminal trial of an American president. Trump arrived in New York on Monday afternoon and spent the night at Trump Tower in Midtown before his set court appearance on Tuesday afternoon. Trump pleaded not guilty on all counts inside the packed Manhattan courtroom. The charges were all Class E felonies related to falsifying business records with intent to defraud or conceal other crimes.
Earlier this afternoon, Donald Trump was arraigned on a New York Supreme Court indictment returned by a Manhattan grand jury on 34 felony counts of falsifying business records in the first degree. Under New York state law, it is a felony to falsify business records with intent to defraud and an intent to conceal another crime. That is exactly what this case is about. 34 false statements made to cover up other crimes. These are felony crimes in New York State, no matter who you are. We cannot and will not normalize serious criminal conduct.
The indictment itself is boilerplate. It doesn't allege any federal crime, any state crime that's been violated. It doesn't allege what the false statement is. And it's really disappointing. It's sad, and we're going to fight it. When you say what his reaction was, what do you expect his reaction is? I mean, his reaction is exactly what would happen if it happened to anybody that I'm looking at now or anybody that's hearing what you're saying. He's frustrated, he's upset, but I'll tell you what, he's motivated. And it's not going to stop him. It's not going to slow him down. And it's exactly what he expected. And so to that extent, there's no surprise. But he's also upset and frustrated. and disappointed and mad that this happened.
I was surprised there were no facts in there. I mean, normally in an indictment you have alleged facts. So they said that this was a false business record entry to aid and abet another crime. We're not saying what the other crime.
Can you tell us what
I'll say this to you. Today's unsealing of this indictment shows that the rule of law died in this country. Because while everyone is not above the law, no one's below it either. And if this man's name was not Donald J. Trump, there is no scenario we'd all be here today. Please understand that based on these charges.
This includes hush money payments made ahead of the 2016 presidential election to porn star Stormy Daniels, to a former Trump Tower doorman, and to a former Playboy model. After the historic arraignment, Trump flew back to his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida, where he gave a statement.
And I never thought anything like this could happen in America. Never thought it could happen. The only crime that I have committed is to fearlessly defend our nation from those who seek to destroy it. They attacked me with an onslaught of fraudulent investigations. Russia, Russia, Russia. Ukraine, Ukraine, Ukraine. Impeachment hoax number 1. Impeachment hoax number 2. The illegal and unconstitutional raid on Mar-a-Lago, right here. The lying to the FISA courts, the FBI and DOJ relentlessly pursuing Republicans, the unconstitutional changes to election laws by not getting approvals from state legislators. Beginning with the radical left, George Soros-backed prosecutor Alvin Bragg of New York, who campaigned on the fact that he would get President Trump. I'm going to get him. I'm going to get him. This is a guy campaigning. He wanted to get President Trump at any cost, and this before he knew anything about me, didn't know a thing about me. He was campaigning. As it turns out, virtually everybody that has looked at this case, including rhinos and even hardcore Democrats, say there is no crime and that it should never have been brought. Never have been brought. Ever. It's an insult to our country, as the world is already laughing at us for so many other reasons, like our open borders, our incompetent withdrawal from Afghanistan, where we left behind American citizens, $85 billion worth of the best military equipment in the world. And this is where we are right now. I have a Trump-hating judge with a Trump-hating wife and family whose daughter worked for Kamala Harris and now receives money from the Biden-Harris campaign, and a lot of it. This fake case was brought only to interfere with the upcoming 2024 election, and it should be dropped immediately.
The trial could begin as early as January 2024, just as primary elections begin for the next presidential race. Joanne Soriano, New York, New York, Eagle News. We live in extraordinary times.
In tonight's other news, U.S. House Speaker Kevin McCarthy sits down with Taiwan's president today for a highly symbolic meeting in California that has already prompted outrage and dire warnings from China. Beijing claims Taiwan as its own territory and balks at any official contact Taipei has with many other countries. This week, it warned McCarthy, a Republican and California native who is second in line to the U.S. presidency, that he was playing with fire by meeting President Tsai.
Drills again.
China firmly opposes the U.S.'s arrangement for Tsai Ing-wen's transit trip to the U.S. and any meeting between her and House Speaker Kevin McCarthy, the third highest-ranking official of the U.S. government, because it seriously contravenes the One China principle and provisions in the Three China-U.S. Joint Communique and gravely undermines China's sovereignty and territorial integrity. We urge the U.S. to abide by the One China principle and provisions in the Three China-U.S. Joint Communique, not to allow Tsai Ing-wen's transit trip to the U.S., not to arrange for any meeting or contact between Tsai and U.S. political figures and officials. The Chinese side will closely monitor the situation as it develops and resolutely defend our sovereignty and territorial integrity. Next question, please.
For
NBC News.
The meeting outside Los Angeles comes on what is technically a stopover for President Tsai Ing-wen after her two-country trip in Latin America to visit Taiwan's few remaining official allies. Taiwan, a flourishing democracy, has been self-governing for decades. It has its own military, an independent judiciary, and all the trappings of a fully functioning state. But only a handful of countries acknowledge it as a sovereign nation. The U.S. formally recognizing Beijing, but is an important backer of Taiwan and maintains strong unofficial ties. Taipei enjoys strong bipartisan support in the U.S. Congress and has grown closer to Washington under Tsai's leadership. Last year, McCarthy's predecessor, Democrat Nancy Pelosi, sparked furor in Beijing by becoming the most senior U.S. politician to visit the island in over 2 decades. And that prompted Beijing to launch its largest ever military exercises in waters around Taiwan. Now, Manila is aware that if an armed conflict between Beijing and Taipei erupts and intensifies over the Taiwan Strait, there is little chance the country will escape the adverse consequences in terms of massive refugee flows, the rapid return of Filipino overseas workers based in Taiwan, and the actual spread of the conflict to the Luzon Straits and even northern Luzon. An evacuation order was issued to coastal dwellers on a remote Philippine island on Tuesday after a 6.2 magnitude earthquake struck in the ocean off the archipelago, triggering a tsunami warning. The shallow quake hit around 9 p.m. about 120 kilometers from Catanduanes Island off the main island of Luzon, according to the U.S. Geological Survey. Shallow quakes tend to cause more damage than deeper ones, but so far, there have been no immediate reports of damage on Catanduanes. But the state seismological agency said the quake had caused a minor sea level disturbance and warned tsunami waves of less than a meter high above normal tides would reach Catanduanes and Samar Islands. Quakes are a regular occurrence in the Philippines, which sits along the Pacific Ring of Fire, an arc of intense seismic and volcanic activity that stretches from Japan through Southeast Asia and across the Pacific Basin. Most of the earthquakes are too weak to be felt by humans, but strong and destructive ones come at random with no technology available to predict when and where they will happen. A press conference was held in New York today to mark the International Day for Mine Awareness and Assistance in Mine Action. Here's Cambodia's Ambassador Sophia Eat.
Just say a few words about the general mine action situation in Cambodia, what we have done and what we will do, and our commitment to the Anti-Personal Mine Ban Convention. As you all know, Cambodia is among the most heavily contaminated country by landmine and explosive remnant of war. And we fully realize that mine action is not only a humanitarian issue, but it is also a precondition for sustainable development that leaves no one behind. The achievement has contributed to the significant casualty drop from 4,320 persons per year in 1996 to an average of 57 casualty per year in the last 6 years.
We commend the leading role of the UN in fostering worldwide efforts in mine actions and emphasize the role of the humanitarian demining plays in the post-conflict context, reconstruction, and the paving the way to a social and economic recovery. And we all know that the number of success stories, like we just heard from my dear colleague from Cambodia, but unfortunately many state parties are still lagging behind with achieving targets related to the mine clearance. Landmines continue to pose a threat to people in Syria, Somalia, Afghanistan, Myanmar, and just to name a few.
Now, April 4 is the International Day designated by the General Assembly to raise awareness and seek assistance for mine action. In 2023, the UN Mine Action Service, or UNMAS, will acknowledge the day under the campaign Mine Action Cannot Wait, highlighting decades of contamination in Cambodia, the Lao Republic, Democratic Republic, and Vietnam, as well as draw attention to recent explosive ordnance contamination in Myanmar, Ukraine, and Yemen. In tonight's other news, clashes erupted inside the AlAqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. Early today, as Israeli police said they had entered to dislodge agitators, a move denounced as an unprecedented crime by the Palestinian Islamist movement Hamas. Take a look. Now, Hamas, which rules the Gaza Strip, called on Palestinians in the West Bank to go en masse to the AlAqsa Mosque to defend it. Israeli police said they had entered the mosque to dislodge agitators who had barricaded themselves inside with fireworks, sticks, and stones. Israeli police have also released this video footage showing what appeared to be fireworks explosions inside the mosque and figures throwing rocks. The mosque compound in the Israeli annexed Old City of East Jerusalem has previously seen clashes and violence between Palestinians and Israelis, particularly during the Muslim fasting month of Ramadan, which draws tens of thousands of worshippers to the Al-Aqsa. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been sucked into a spiral of violence since the start of this year, after one of the most right-wing governments in Israel's history took office at the end of December. The conflict has claimed the lives of at least 91 Palestinians, 15 Israelis, and 1 Ukrainian since January, according to an AFP tally based on official sources from both sides. Now, the Philippine Embassy in Israel advised Filipinos to avoid or postpone going to crowded and sensitive areas until April 30 due to security concerns. And these areas are namely West Bank, Jerusalem, Temple Mount, Damascus Gate, Herod's Gate, Al-Wad Road, Muzrara Road, areas around East Jerusalem, and areas near the border of Gaza and Lebanon. The embassy also said Filipinos must remain careful and observant, vigilant of their surroundings. The Philippine Statistics Authority today reported that the inflation rate in March this year has slowed down to 7.6% from 8.6% the previous month. In a press conference, PSA Undersecretary and National Statistician Dennis Mapa said last month's figure brought the inflation rate for the first quarter of the year to 8.3%.
Ang headline inflation ng pagtaas ng presyo ng mga produkto at serbisyo sa bansa ay bumagal sa antas na 7.6% nitong Marso 2023. Noong Pebrero 2023, ang inflation ay naitala sa antas na 8.6%, at 4.0% naman noong Marso 2022. Ang average inflation mula Enero hanggang Marso 2023 ay nasa antas na 8.3%.
Mr. Mapa attributed the downtrend in inflation to the slower increase in prices of food and non-alcoholic beverages at 9.3% in March from 10.8% in the previous survey. He also said the lower food and non-alcoholic beverages inflation was mainly due to the slowdown in the inflation of vegetables, including onions. The Department of National Defense Chief Carlito Galvez Jr. today maintained that the 4 additional Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement or EDCA sites would greatly boost the country's defensive capabilities. He said the DND and Armed Forces of the Philippines welcome the addition of the 4 sites under the EDCA with the U.S., noting that these will further boost the country's capabilities to protect our national interests as well as contribute to collective defense in the region. The Philippines earlier named Naval Base Camilo Ocias in Santa Ana, Cagayan, Lalo Airport in Lalo, Cagayan, Camp Melchor de la Cruz in Gamu, Isabela, and Balabac Island in Palawan as additional EDCA locations. This is in line with Galvez's and U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin's announcement on adding 4 new sites for projects under the EDCA in February. EDCA projects are also seen to benefit the Philippines economically through the provision of jobs and other economic opportunities in the construction activities in the agreed locations and procurement of local goods and supplies by the U.S. military and personnel. As my usual habit, I'd like to end the day on a positive note. Let's encourage and build each other up so that no one is left behind. And that's it for tonight's broadcast. I'm Alma Angeles. Stay in the news because we live in extraordinary times. Good night.